We've talked about FIRE, or financial independence, retire early, on this show before, but how do you line up your finances to be able to make that major change to your lifestyle? Jonathan Mendonza from Choose FI stopped by the show to explain how we can create space to execute a fully funded lifestyle change. We cover a lot today, like eliminating debt, increasing your savings, and creating additional income so you're not dependent on your job. Plus, just how much are your years of education and career loyalty really worth? Welcome to the MapleMoney Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. I love our sponsor Borrowell's mission to help Canadians make great decisions about credit. They've taken a product that used to be $23 a month and made it absolutely free. To get your free credit score, free credit report, and continual monitoring, head over to maplemoney.com/borrowell. That's maplemoney.com/BORROWELL. Now here's Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to the Maple Money Show.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here.
So I had your other half, Brad, on last week. So I wanted to bring you on as well, and we wanted to kind of go through. Obviously, with Choose FI, a big part of that is financial independence. But I wanted to kind of go further back than that with you, and sort of the building blocks we can use to get there. So just to hop right into it, can you kind of start us off with say someone's just kind of getting onto this whole FI and FIRE movement? What's sort of step one of their path towards that?
Yeah, I mean, this may be obvious to some people, but maybe not so obvious to others. You need to know how much your life costs. You need to track your spending, right? How much does it cost you to get from the beginning of the month to the end of the month? And when you stack 12 of those together, how much did your life cost over the period of a year? That gives us a lot of information. It's very easy to get fixated on how much you make, but it's not really a true marker of how much you need, right? I mean, and so if you're always thinking about how can I replace my income, you're kind of losing sight of the forest for the trees. What we need to do is make sure that we can fund our lifestyle. And in the concept, or, in the framework of financial independence, what would it look like to get to the point where our job is no longer funding our lifestyle, but rather an income stream that doesn't rely on us showing up 9 to 5 with a 3-hour car commute, whatever. How can we get to the point where we have this third income earner in the home that's working for us, but it's working 24/7, man, and it doesn't care about traffic?
That's great. The idea of sort of figuring out where you're at in a month or a year, I found Mint to be a huge help with that. I don't know about you, but for me, it just showed me how much I was wasting money on certain things.
Yeah, and that's the intentionality component. I mean, obviously, I think most of us say, hey, if we can make $1 million a year, then funding our lifestyle isn't going to be very difficult, right? Like maybe Mint may or may not be important. I mean, we certainly know people that have won the lottery and are bankrupt a year later, so it's not to discount it. But for the average individual that's not making $1 million a year, knowing how much your life actually costs, and then more importantly, focusing on the items that are actually bringing value to your life gives you a better metric. Because here's the thing. It would be nice to have all the ands. I want this and this and this and this. But by knowing what you need gives you a lot more authority. Not to say you can't have the ands, but by focusing on covering the needs gives you security, and it gives you options. It gives you flexibility. It gives you the ability, as we're going to explore a little bit more, hopefully, the ability to make decisions in the immediate, mid and long-term future that are really maybe not in your employer's best interest, but they're certainly in your best interest.
Mm-hmm. So on the expense side of that, are you a fan of budgeting then?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those interesting points. I'm not dogmatic about it. I know individuals that have crushed the game without budgeting, but I think you do need to look at your personality. I'm a spender. That's just my natural bias. And that's really cool because it basically implies that like financial is not just for people that are naturally frugal. It's for everybody. It's based on simple math. Not to say it's easy, but it is simple. And regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, you can do this, but you have to acknowledge who you are as a person. Know thyself, guiding light, right? So if you have 100% savings rate until you spend $1, you talked to my co-host Brad recently, that's him, right? 100% savings rate. I will relinquish $1 to purchase food and keep the lights on, right? Like that's a one for him. He has never budgeted, does not need to budget. It's not a priority for him. But if you're closer to me, wow, look at all this cool stuff I can buy. Look at all these things that are out there. Look at all these gadgets I can get. Then a budget can help you focus your goals. You know what your life cost, then you focus on what you need to cover, and then you focus on what your goals are. So in my case, I I'm from America, live inside the United States. And in 1998, I was introduced to Google. I remember that being in my English class. And I'm thinking about careers. And one of my very first Google searches was, top 10 professions, right? I think a lot of us at some point in time have entered in that top 10 profession type thing. What should I do with my life? That existential question that you ask yourself at the age of 17 that then somehow you have to lock yourself into for the next 40 years. I asked that question of Google early on. And one of those options was pharmacy. Now, I have always understood, as kind of coming from a lower middle class family inside the United States, that entrepreneurship wasn't on the plate. Entrepreneurship was for people that were going to go bankrupt and didn't realize it yet. There was no way that was going to work for me. So I needed to get a high-paying W-2 income job. Sorry, a high-paying job, right? I realize that W-2 doesn't translate, but I think most of us know we can think of those STEM jobs that everybody should get. It's just obvious. Well, in my case, medicine, pharmacy, you're going to make an entry-level 6-figure salary. But I guess I wasn't quite as good at math as I thought because I didn't totally appreciate the opportunity costs that came with my chosen career path. So in the States, and maybe in Canada too, but in the States, 4 years for undergrad, 4 years for pharmacy school, and you come out. So I'm coming out at the age of, I'm coming out at the age of 28 years old with $168,000 in student loan debt. And I can tell you it is a lot easier to take that student loan debt out than it is to pay it off. So when you come out and you have this entry-level 6-figure salary, you are also going to be in a somewhat higher marginal tax bracket than if you make $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000. It's just the way, our country is basically set up. And I'm sure Canada has something similar.
Yeah, same here. We've got the different tax brackets as you work your way up.
So you're making this higher income, and simultaneous to that, you have this high debt burden, $168,000. I mean, now in some areas of the country, that's a mortgage. I mean, that you could very easily find a mortgage of a very modest home for that same amount. I have it and no home to show for it. And I'm committed to paying this down because I'm already kind of coming from this mindset that debt is going to limit my options. So I decide to pay it off. So basically, I come home, I take my income, I send 75 to 80% of it back to the government to pay off my student loan debts. We're living on just kind of my wife's income, which was much smaller than mine. She was a teacher's salary, but we were able to basically live just on that. I think I was keeping like $3 or $4 an hour of my salary. And for 4 years, I basically worked my tail off in a job that kind of was slowly killing me. I wasn't loving it. I was doing well at it, but it wasn't lighting me up. I found myself just basically handling the equivalent of TPS reports if you're an accountant, right? I was just doing paperwork adjustment and on the phone with insurance companies. Not exactly what I felt like I went to school for. And at the end of this 4 years, I had basically paid back all my student loans. I'm back to essentially debt-free just over the age of 30. I'm actually doing a little bit better than that because I had been doing my match with my company. So I had some amount in savings, but I'm kind of just getting back to broke at the age of 30 years old, right? And I look at this now and I say, was that really the best path? Because if you kind of flip that head on the coin, if you look at it just a little bit differently, if instead of going $168,000 into debt, I had at the age of 18 said, well, how can I actually over the next 10 years save $168,000? So what would it look like to just get a median income job, maybe making $50,000 a year, figure out a way to maybe be a little bit extreme. Now that's, well, you're going to be extreme. College students are extreme by nature. You're like living in a dorm room with other people. You're sharing bathrooms with 5 or 6 other people. If instead of doing this in the context of school, I just focused on figuring out how to get a median income, which there's a bunch of options to do that, figuring out how to save 20, 30% of my income, saving $16,000 a year, do that for 10 years, have $168,000 saved up. This is like the magic of looking at the problem differently. If you never save another dollar, right, for the rest of time, for the rest of your investing career, you're just paycheck to paycheck. So you're not saving anything, but you're not going into debt. You're just living within your means, nothing else. At the age of 50, you're a millionaire. Like, it's that simple. So basically, if I hadn't made any other decisions and I just by following the path that I followed, it cost me $1 million, right? It's just, I don't think we think about that. I don't think we think about the opportunity cost of looking at the problem differently. And so many of us get bogged down in, I have to get that degree that guarantees me success, guarantees me that job, and I need to do it at any cost. You know how many doctors and physicians are getting back to broke at 40? Or it's like an ongoing meme that your student loans are going to outlive you, right? They're just going to be there for the rest of the time. What is that costing you? What is that costing your financial future?
Yeah, for sure. I never had a huge student loan debt story. I just went to the local community college, but I was terrible with spending. So I, I have a similar look at this where yeah, my entire 20s were lost to the inability to invest. It was all spending. And
Yeah, I think of it as a lost decade. I think a lot of us do. For millennials in particular, that period of time between your 20s and 30s is basically in service to education and paying down student loan debt. And you see that with kind of the demographics now, how all of us, our generation, is just pushing back all these other aspects of our life. All these other big major decisions are just getting pushed back in service of how do I stay afloat and make sure I can make the minimum payments on this massive debt that I just signed up for.
Yeah. And I was in business administration. I even had a economics teacher show us the graph of like what that extra decade can do for you with the compounding. But I wasn't ready to hear that at the time, and just kept doing what I was doing.
And I think part of that is just normalizing the conversation. There was nobody in my social group that thought that my current path was a bad idea. My parents thought going to pharmacy school was the best idea ever. I'm not even saying that it was the bad idea, but I'm saying that I wasn't aware of the power of the equation that I just laid out for you. I just didn't know how to look at the numbers, and I didn't know how to analyze what a successful path has looked like. I think our society has kind of passed down to us that there's this one little lane that involves student loans at all costs, like whatever it's going to cost you, just get the degree and it's going to be okay. And I think as a society, for us personally, so for myself, but also for my child, we need to look very critically at that equation and say, is that really the case? If it is, I'm fine with it. If getting a college degree is still the best guarantee of a solid financial career, I am not looking for a different answer. But I suspect, based on my own experiences and based on those of my peer group, individuals that came out with a teaching degree, which pays in the United States, at least where I am, somewhere around $45,000 a year. They have $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 of student loan debt. The math becomes increasingly difficult. Mm-hmm. And I don't want that for my child. I want a better alternative. And so that's kind of like what I have been doing personally with Brad. We've just been trying to find examples of people that made a different choice and got a different result. And surprisingly, it's not all tech engineers in California, right? I mean, that's not the only path to success.
Yeah, I think, I hope so. Maybe it's just the bubble I'm in, but I hope with podcasting and the internet in general, two things are starting to happen, that people are sort of realizing that college isn't always the best choice for them, and all the news that comes out about student loan debt. But on the other side of that, there's so many new ways to make money that didn't exist when I was in college. Just again, the internet, there's an app for almost any kind of service you could offer, whether it's driving a car, mowing a lawn, walking a dog. What's sort of your thought on the income side of this? So someone they're in a career right now. What's their next step? Is it asking for a raise or doing the side hustle? What are their options?
Yeah, so this is great. So we have an equation that we're all subject to. What you earn minus what you spend is equal to the difference, or the gap. We want to increase the gap ultimately. We don't want to just focus on one side of things. You can only frugalize so far. On the extreme end, we know Jacob from Early Retirement Extreme, like he figured out how to pull it off for an individual, $7,000 a year, and he's managed to sustain that in the face of inflation over the past 8 years. Like, and he's still pulling that off. That is an outlier. That's not the vast majority of us. So clearly the situation, if you're making $15 an hour, isn't to say, all right, 40 years from now, while we're still making $15 an hour, how can we pull off a 50% savings rate, right? We got to be intellectually honest and say that it's a lot easier to hit a 50% savings rate when you can double or triple your income. So we don't need to just limit ourselves to, okay, let's just focus on this side of it. There is a baseline amount for food. There is a baseline amount for rent, for a mortgage, for having a car payment. I suspect that for the vast majority of people, it's a lot less than you would think. I think if you're intentional to it and you apply some real critical thought, you can cut your expenses probably, if you're not tracking it and you've just let life happen to you for 20 or 30 years, whatever. I suspect that within a relatively short period of time, you could cut your lifestyle by 20 or 30% by focusing on your car cost, by focusing on your food cost, and certainly your housing cost has to come into that. I realize that in some cases you may feel like you're locked in depending on your situation, but if you start with your food, you work your way down, you look at your cars and look at your house, those big three are easily going to account for 50% of your living. So, but talk about the latte if you want to, that's fine. But when you look at your life as a pie, what makes up that pie and what's going to have the biggest impact? Let's talk about your grocery bill. Let's talk about your transportation. Let's talk about your house. So that's the expense side of things. Let's go back to the income side of the things. If you have a solid W-2 income if you have a solid income job, right? You have a good paying career. Career hacking is a big part of this. And this is something that I've been studying increasingly because I realize that's one of the needs of our community. What does it look like to be able to out earn and out increase the raises that our peers are getting? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. We know that in theory, but practically, do you realize that it's a skill set and that there are individuals that while you're settling for the 1, 2, or maybe if you're lucky, 3% raise, which is roughly keeping up with inflation, there are individuals that are in the exact same sector as you that are getting 8% year over year, 10%, double digit raises. It's happening. Just because you don't know them has to do more with your zone of awareness rather than the actual realities of the job. I think that's across the board. It's for all of us in every aspect of life. How do we increase our zone of awareness? One of the ways to do that is honestly listen to shows where people have done that. It's that simple. Can you search for individuals that are in your shoes, whether it be a fire department, whether it be in coding, whether it be in entrepreneurship, whether it be in pharmacy? What are individuals doing to get outsized results? One of those easy, most obvious choices could be just know the range. Do you actually know what people in your industry are making? Have you logged on to an app, right? You said there's an app for that. Have you logged on to Glassdoor and see what the range is for your position? Have you contacted a recruiter to see? Because recruiters, think about the benefits that recruiters have. Their incentive alignment, their entire job, the way they get paid is to get you to leave your job and go to the job that they're recommending. What is going to cause you to do that? Well, the most obvious thing would be that it would be an increase in pay. If they can't present you with an offer that shows you an increase in pay, why would you leave? That's a good thing. So why aren't we talking to recruiters if we feel stuck? That's one possibility. Have you updated your resume? Sometimes your resume is a way of what is the story that you tell yourself about yourself to a future employer? And I'll be honest with you, although I have tons of words on this podcast, when I go to write something down, I gridlock, man. I just lock down. It does not flow. I can't tell the story about myself on paper. What if there was someone else that this was their gift? They could look at you the same way you could look at yourself when you can't come up with a single positive thing to say about yourself. They look at your same set of accomplishments and they absolutely crush it. This was actually the case with Gwen, who has a podcast, Fire Drill Podcast. She actually left work for a period of time to focus on entrepreneurship. And then that really wasn't panning out. She goes back to it, which is another point. We should come back to that in a couple of minutes. She goes back to work and she's looking for jobs and she's able to get some, but she's kind of stuck at this income level. She hears about this person that can redo resumes or it has a gift. This person actually works in tech recruiting. They are very good at knowing what tech recruiters are looking for. They go and they look at her portfolio and they say, you have it all. You're just not really showing off your skill set. They rearrange things, they reword it, and suddenly she's getting offers for $20 or $30 or $40,000 more than she was getting. And that costs a couple $100. You pay a couple $100 and suddenly, like, it's still you. You're the same person, but that's all that was separating you from that next level. So I think we need to look at this a little bit more holistically. What would it look like to get 8% raises year over year when everybody else is getting 1, 2, or maybe 3 on the high end? If you stack up 3 or 4 or 5 years of those, you are going to crush it. Don't be afraid to leave your current job and go across the street. Unfortunately, I don't like having to say this, that this is true, but I've just seen it enough and I've seen it personally. People that are able to get ridiculous bumps in pay are those that are willing to leave their current job. Those that are loyal to the current company are going to get current company bumps in pay, 1, 2, 3%. Those that are willing to look outside of that and find out what the company across the street is paying and do one of two things. 1, take that offer from across the street back to their current employer, or 2, actually leave, maybe move, maybe relocate, are able to just completely outperform their peers. And you only need to stack a few of these wins together over a period of a decade to drastically outperform your peers. So, like, think about your options as a portfolio of ideas. What do I want to do? You don't have to do everything, but you're going to have to do something if you want to get a different result than you're getting now.
Yeah, I found the same thing in my career where loyalty is not rewarded. You get that 2 to 3%. 3% would be on the high end for sure. And I know a lot of people where if they've jumped around a lot, especially in your 20s, again, a great decade to be doing all this.
Lost decade. What if we could reclaim? What if we could normalize reclaiming the last decade, and we had a tribe of individuals that were looking at that same period that everybody else was just hemorrhaging $168,000 a student loan debt and spending the next decade figuring out how to pay it off. They were focused on that single decade. I'm not going to focus on how do I get a degree. We could get one. I'm not saying don't get one. My real focus is, how do I get that first 6 figures saved up? How do I get that first $168,000 saved up? You're just set. I mean, you're set for life if you can put in that same energy. That, in my case, if you can go and get a doctorate in anything, a master's in anything, frankly, a bachelor's in anything, if you can apply the same intensity into something that, was I interested in it? Maybe. Or do people get degrees in stuff that they're not interested in? Absolutely. All the time. If you could take that same energy into, how do I outperform this equation? You're going to crush life, right?
Yeah. We need 20 to be 20 to be the new 30, where people focus on investing and sort of that career advancement instead of being stuck in school. And you mentioned the idea that some people don't even know what they want to do with university. I think that's the saddest thing of it all.
How many people get to that junior, senior year, and this is what they're saying? They haven't figured out what they want to do. And what do they say? I think I need to get that extra degree. I think I need to get the master's degree in order to really lock down what it is I want to do. And you're sitting there and this is going to be on the back of student loan debt. And do you think that is going to be solved at the end of the master's, at the end of the doctorate? Like, you come up with a plan. I think our parents, rightly so, believe that the best thing they could do for their kids is to have their kids go to college. I understand this. The paradigm in the 1990s, late 1980s was, if you went to college, statistically, you were going to do better. I'm sure that statistic still holds true, but it is a lot dicier because we have a student loan debt burden that is just swelling, both of our countries, and our generation is like getting buried in this stuff. So you've got to be intentional. I'm not saying don't go to school, but I'm saying have a plan, because the only thing that's fixed is like, hey, we've got your back. Take out as much student loans if you need. If the federal loans don't cover it, don't worry. You can take out private loans on top of it. We're going to make sure that you're comfortable while you're here in school. But does that school follow up with you 2 months after you graduate and say, hey, how was the job? By the way, we have some leads for you. We really think you should do this. Like, once you graduate, it's on you. Figure it out. And just, you need to be realistic about that when you actually get started with this. Don't get a degree just for a degree.
Yeah. So with just using your story as an example, how did you make that decision to leave your career? Were you financially independent at that point, or did you make that leap, which is kind of a scary thing to do?
Yeah. So I am not working in pharmacy anymore. So I am 33 years old, and I'm no longer in pharmacy. And, we talked about how entrepreneurship was so scary. I'm an entrepreneur now. Like, that transition is actually worth highlighting. And let me start by saying that transition would not have been possible with 6 figures of student loan debt for me. I'm what I would call a chicken entrepreneur, right? There's these guys that it doesn't matter what it takes, burn the boats. They're just going to do it. Not me at all. I have a family. I have one son. My wife and I live here in Richmond, Virginia, and Richmond is a relatively affordable place. So, there's these areas of the country that have your starter homes cost $800,000 and it's condemned, right? It's just an empty lot. Hey, have fun. You put a tent in the backyard. It'll keep you warm. That is not where we live. Richmond, you can get a starter home for around $220,000. And actually, that's a component. Actually, you could probably go less than that. You can get homes for even less than that. But our home costs $220,000, and it's a beautiful home in a nice, suburban neighborhood. I say that to say that geo arbitrage is a big part of this. Like, it is harder in some areas of the country, and you just need to be intellectually honest. It's harder to make the math work in some part of the countries than it is in others. If that's the case, you don't need to take a fix that our only path is just to figure out how to do it in our area. I think some of us do. We say, well, it's either work here or that's it. My co-host Brad was from Long Island. It's a very expensive part of the country, and homes probably are very close to what I just described, and it just kind of keeps getting worse. A lot of taxes. The choice they made to move also to Richmond, Virginia, for them was a massive piece of their story. We talked about that pie, your food, transportation, and your housing. Their cost of housing here, similar to ours, it was nothing. And so that gave them a huge leg up. So we're here in Richmond, Virginia. We didn't get a massive McMansion, and we didn't have a huge mortgage hanging over our head. We kept it lean. Our lifestyle cost somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000 a year for those first 4 years that I was paying off debt. And because I made that choice, which was hard, that's a hard choice. Like, it's great now to say it's paid off, but the reality was I was working every other weekend, and I would get home after that 2-week kind of rotation, and I'd be finishing up my Sunday shift after having, it's a position where you kind of stand for like 8 to 10 hours at a time, and kind of in this exhausted, I need to decompress state of mind, I'd walk up to this spare bedroom that we had, where we had this whiteboard, and this whiteboard had something like a checkbox for it represented a pay period. Every 2 weeks was a pay period. And I knew that it was going to take me about 4 or 5 years to pay off all my student loan debt. One checkbox would represent the end of one pay period, and knew that it was gone. And at the end of this 2 week period, I would go and I'd check the box off. And then after that, I would just stumble my way downstairs to the couch and almost like this, oh, done. And that was a slog. I did that for like 4 years. It was just kind of like, it was a grind. It was wearing me out. But at the end of that, I had no debt. I had roughly about 2 years of savings, kind of in place. And the subtext for this was I started a small passion project on the side talking about my favorite topic in the world, right? I mean, financial independence. You can see that this lights me up. This is something that I was excited about long before I was financially independent. I was excited about finding out what people who had gone down this path had done, because nobody in my peer group, nobody in my social circle, my parents, they didn't have this information. They were not able to give it to me. The best they could give me was, avoid credit card debt. Like that's what I was working with. So to find out that there were these people that had made these radically different choices and were getting radically different results, I just wanted to be a part of that conversation. So I decided to start a podcast with Brad, my co-host, and we weren't making any money on day one or anything. It wasn't even necessarily the plan. It was just a way of documenting, or kind of like, it was going to be the situation where Brad, who had already reached financial independence, and me, who was still on the path, were kind of doing experiments in financial independence, my journey to go from debt-free to financial independence. And that arc, I was expecting it to take 5 to 10 years, something like that. You get back to debt-free, you have some savings build up, and then, the magic of compounding. We could talk about that later. I'm sure it's something you've already discussed in some degree already on your show. But what was interesting is, keep in mind, I'm bootstrapping this thing. A podcast, I mean, as you know, you can start a podcast really for free if you want to, but even on the high end, it's less than $1,000. This is not a major business expense to get started. You need a microphone and a computer. You can obviously spend a ton more, and as we've gotten more polished, we do have more equipment, but on day one, a couple $100 is going to get you started. So we were just having this fun conversation, and people really started to enjoy it. And I remember I made 30 cents one day through an Amazon affiliate link overnight. While obviously we had put a ton of time in, but we weren't really actively monetizing the show. And I had suddenly made, 30 cents. And then it kind of kept happening. And I realized there were people that were getting value both from our show and from our recommendations. They were spending time pouring through the content that we've been producing, and the show was growing. And, it wasn't paying my bills. It wasn't even coming close. 30 cents isn't going to, cover my electric bill. But there was something here, and it didn't cost me anything to pursue this. This was just this is what I would be doing anyways, for fun. And is there a way that I can share? Because I can't go talk about financial independence in my neighborhood, right? I can't get my friends to round up and have a great conversation about this. Money is still kind of a weird taboo topic. People find it easier to talk about sports. But there's tons of people like me around the world that honestly would rather talk about financial independence and the path to financial independence. For me, this is my default conversation. I was at a baby shower relatively recently, and my friends know who I am now, in terms of what my default status is. I'm not trying to pretend that I know who's in the Super Bowl. They're just, they know me. We're going to talk about employee stock purchase programs. We're going to talk about maxing out your investment vehicles. And so increasingly, this is awesome, but that's not where it started. And as the business grew, I just realized that there was something here. And I remember there was this point in time. So the podcast was kind of taking up more and more of my time. I should say that. I got to be honest with you. It's not a whole lot of work to create one podcast. But as we started to do 2 podcasts a week, and we started to consistently produce and handling all the stuff that, as you know, that goes along with running, a type of business like this, which it was quickly becoming, it was now taking up 10, 20, 30, 40 plus hours a week. I was like, wow, I have a job on top of a job. And it was great because I could also see that this was really becoming a thing, but it was becoming a little bit unsustainable side by side with my day job, my pharmacy job. I got to the point in time where there were 3 things that were all happening at once. One, a documentary, which is actually going to be released this year, called Playing with Fire, wanted to come film with us for a couple days. 2, we wanted to go to a conference to represent our podcast, and it's a Fincon conference. It's where me and you first met in person. It's an awesome conference. And then the third thing, and arguably the most important, was that we were due to go visit my wife's family. My wife is actually from Zimbabwe in Africa.
Okay.
And that's not a trip you can take with a 1 or 2 day turnaround, right? That's going to take you 1 or 2 days to get over the jet lag. And so it's a 2-week trip. We usually go every other year. And I work in corporate America, right? I mean, corporate America, you get 10 calendar days off in a row. That's it. That's the cap. Like, that's if your boss is generous. It wasn't going to happen. I went and I looked through, and I'm the manager at a pharmacy that I work at. I went and looked at my company's policies, and I saw they had something called a unpaid family leave of absence. And I went to my employer and I said, hey, I've got everything in great shape. I have someone that can fill in for us. And I have someone that can fill in for us and make sure that the ship runs perfectly. I have to, for multiple reasons, take this 3-week unpaid leave of absence. Would it be okay if I did that? And my boss said to me, I don't think it's in the company's best interest to let you do that. Now, 99% of the time, right, when a boss says that to an employee that's on the financial edge, on the financial cliff, has $168,000 in student loan debt, doesn't have any significant savings, the employee turns meekly around and goes back to work and makes justifications to his family on why they couldn't go see his wife's parents, right? Why they weren't going to be able to make the trip this year. But because of what I laid out for you, because that I had been a chicken entrepreneur and I had started something in the background that was, it wasn't like replacing my income, but it was just starting to replace my expenses. Because when I finished paying off my debt, I had kept up that really intense savings rate. I had actually about two years worth of expenses set aside. And because I could always go back, right? You can always go back. I think that's what people think, it's a one-way door. It's like a turnstile, man. I realized I could always go back. I said to my boss, I don't think it's in my best interest to stay. So this is my FU money story. And I've heard about this before, this idea that when you're not on the financial cliff, you're not paycheck to paycheck, you get to make decisions. They may not be in your employer's best interest, but they're in your best interest. And they're in the best interest potentially of your family. And honestly, at a very selfish level, the reason that we're talking about my business now or Choose FI right now is because when it came down to it, and I had to make a choice between my corporate obligations and my passion project / side hustle, I was able to choose that because I wasn't weighed down by the mountain of debt. So talking about the flexibility, some people get out of their college degree and they have their student loans and they have the ability to pay it down, but they just say, why? Or they have credit card debt. Oh, why? I can afford the payment. It's easy. Why should I pay it down? Because when you don't pay it down, when you have that, what you actually have, you may have a low payment, but what you actually have is risk. And you've locked yourself into one particular scenario where as long as everything stays the same, you're going to be fine 25 years from now. Don't look at how much you actually paid, but you're going to be fine. But if anything changes, and you do not know what your 10-year future self is going to want. Some people listen to this and say, well, I love my job. You couldn't pay me to leave my job. And great. Your current self may say that. Your 10-year future self may say that. But I guarantee you a percentage of the people listening to this who think that will disagree because their boss who they love retires and they have a new boss that's a jerk, because their sector goes away, because automation takes something, because the future is uncertain. And what you can control, whatever you can control now by reclaiming that lost decade, by not financing the remainder of your life, do it. Your 10-year future self will thank you.
Great. Can we quickly run through sort of some of the goals to FI? Like sort of how much should someone have, how many years should someone have saved up of income? How much should they withdraw? Just kind of give people this ballpark idea of what they're aiming for.
Yeah, cool. So this is like one of those big it depends type questions, right? Like, hey, it's not medical advice. Consult your doctor before you, yada, yada. It's great. So first of all, let's track our finances. And then once we're there, let's figure out what it looks like to get back to debt free. Well, what does debt free mean? Does my mortgage count? Does my student loans count? Maybe. I typically put the mortgage aside as an investment potential. I treat it more like an investment. If you make the decision to pay down your mortgage aggressively, think about that the same way you might think about investing in bonds, right? You're basically locking in a fixed interest rate savings. So maybe, but let's focus more on the consumer debt. And then you're looking at student loans, you're looking at credit card debt, you're looking at car payment, and then you're kind of dividing up that by interest rate. But let's just assume we're talking about crazy consumer debt. You got couch payments, you're financing your blinds, you're going to rent-a-centers. Come on, let's clean it up. Let's get all of that out of the way. You got a 1% car note, interest rate on your car, it's at 1%. You're like, well, should I really focus on paying that off? Maybe if it's indicative of a mindset, but if you've got a plan and you've mapped everything else, maybe not. So that's the it depends part. But the other half of this is what's the path to FI? Know how much your life costs. And then here's the basic math. If you save 1% of your income every year, right? Like 1%, if you have 1% savings rate, it's going to take you 99 years to replace 1 year of expenses. If you have you work 99 years, you get 1 year off, right? Like, oh, that doesn't sound ideal. I don't know how many cycles I can run of that. All right. You got a 25% savings rate. That means that you work 3 years, you get 1 year off. If we can get to a 50% savings rate, that means we work here, we get a year. I mean, it sounds obvious. You work here, you get a year off, right? But if we can stack enough of those together, like say 10 to 15 of those together, what's amazing about it is just due to essentially the magic of compounding investments, you create for yourself a perpetual money-making machine that can fund your lifestyle. We talked about that third income earner in the home that can fund your lifestyle for the rest of the time. It's more fun than that and more nuanced, because if along the way we can create other forms of income as well, it kind of counts towards that. So like people, start on this path and then they diverge and they get a couple rental properties, and the rental properties are cash flowing a little bit. And now that's coming off what you need to replace, right? Maybe you start a little side hustle, and the side hustle is producing a little bit of income, and hopefully that's more or less passive. Like if it's passive, then that's kind of replacing a piece of that. The idea is with the flexibility, let's slowly get to the point where we're actually creating a life that we can get excited about. Very few people in my social sphere now are truly looking for a way to get to the point where they can do nothing. They're looking for a way to carve out the aspects of their life that do not light them up, like in my case, handling TPS reports, right?
Yeah.
How do I get rid of those and spend more time having the types of conversations that I'm having with you right now? And I get that not everybody, it's not pharmacy for everybody. And with one person, I heard about someone that was creating tutorials on how to make artisan loaves of bread. Like, is there a way that if you, for the first time in your life, actually had space to do whatever you want, what would you be doing? And I think there's a few ingredients there that get me very excited. Like in my life, like the perfect life looks like autonomy, mastery, purpose, identity, connection, autonomy. I want to work on what I want to work on it when I want to work on it. You may think it's dumb, but for me, like I love digging into this stuff. So I'm going to spend 2 weeks if I want to. And like, this is the mastery piece as well. I want to go back and I want to learn how to play piano. Maybe I played it for 3 years when I was a kid and then thought it was dumb. And then now I'm suddenly like, wow, it's really cool. I wish I'd spent more time doing that. Like I want to dig into it. You see those kids that are trying to learn how to skateboard and they just will like be breaking their arms and their legs and they just keep going back to, you're like, how the hell are you motivated to do that? But there's mastery in other aspects of your life. What would you want to apply that to? Purpose. I want to feel like what I'm doing has some sort of impact on the world. Like I think a lot of people, when they get to the point that working is optional, like Bill Gates does not need to work, right? Like does not, but what is he doing? And you could see it increasingly. He's increasingly passionate about the Bill Gates Foundation and giving back to the world and making the world a better place. He doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need that. Purpose is what drives him and being able to have some sort of impact. And then for us, identity and connection, right? Like doctors struggle with this a lot because their identity is a physician. If your identity is a physician, what do you do when you retire? Are you still a physician? Like that's a part of your identity. And then connection. Who's your tribe of people? Who are the people that you're connecting with? What are you doing? That's why the financial independence community is such a big part of this, as opposed to, hey, it's just math, right? Community and that connection is a massive piece. So I would just like to make the case that as you design a life you can get excited about, you don't necessarily need to get all of those. But as you're thinking about crafting your life, you should be looking to hit some of those, because if you can nail a few of them and lock them all into place, you're going to be very happy with where this intentional life actually drives you. Now, from a mathematical perspective, there's some obvious markers. When you actually get to debt-free, whatever your version of debt-free looks like, I would make the case that it's everything except for the mortgage. When you get to debt-free, in my mind, that's when your financial freedom clock really begins. And I think other people have backed that up. I know a few individuals, there's a small asterisk here, that have looked at the math, have said my student loan interest are actually pretty good, like sub 3%. So I'm going to make the minimum payment on that. And then everything else, I'm going to put into an investment vehicle that I suspect over the long term will do better. That's kind of like, if that's you, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, but that person clearly has a plan. And then the next piece of that is like, maybe that you just got to pick some arbitrary kind of points in time. And I'll give you a couple, hopefully to inspire some people, because that idea of financial independence, really awesome, right? Let me get to the point where working is optional. What's the downside? And then getting there, also really cool. Hey, I'm here. But if there's 10 to 15 years in the middle and there's nothing to keep you motivated, like, how do you not fall off the wagon? Well, community is part of that. But what about actual metrics? So getting to the point where you're debt-free. Hey, give yourself a big shout, big scream, have a celebration. That is amazing. How few people hit that. You could throw checkpoints in there, like the first time that you max out all of your tax advantaged accounts, because now all that money's not having to go to student loan debt. That's a really, really big deal. There's certainly milestones. The first time in your life that you have a 6-figure net worth. You know, when you have $10 saved up in an investment account, compounding doesn't really seem super cool, right? The next day you have $10.02, like whatever, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't, but when you get up to 6 figures and you have that $100,000 for the first time in your life, you realize the next day, you know, something crazy happens in the market and it goes way up, or maybe it goes down, but you just see for the first time how that volatility actually affects like your portfolio is affected by the swings of the market. And when the market goes dramatically up, you go up with it. That's massive. I remember that point in time where I suddenly, for the first time, had $100,000 saved up in an investment account. I was like, holy crap. That first time where you have, and you know, depending on your lifestyle, maybe these can be moved around a little bit, but when you have a couple years worth of expenses saved up for the first time, so think about that. Most people are 1 or 2 paychecks away from a financial cliff. You, for the very first time, if you get fired, you have 2 years to figure it out. If you decide to leave and focus more on your side hustle, now it's no longer like risky. It's kind of just an opportunity because you could always go back, right? But you got 2 years before you've run out of runway. That's amazing. And the cool thing is this isn't like binary. It's not, hey, am I financially independent or not? No, like even in my case, the control is continually going to your side of the court. And what's really crazy about this is the more control you have, the more likely raises are to come at you. The less you need your employer, the more they need you. Suddenly, it's weird. It shouldn't work that way. I'm not making the case that it's fair. I'm telling you it's reality. You see it over and over again. When you have the ability to walk away because you don't need the job, because you've got 2 years, because you can relocate, because your employer will do anything to keep you. And to keep you, they will incentivize you with extra income. So it just gets easier. So don't lose sight of that. And then next from there, there's other really cool points in time. And that point, the crossover point is a big one. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. The crossover point, that point in time, which your investments, for the first time, the first month that your investments create more income than you are, right? So, you know, you create this income, you put something in your account, and then you compare that to what your investments actually basically appreciated and your investments did more. So now, for the first time, your investments are working harder than you are. That's insane. And there's these little things. So you got to look for them. Don't lose sight of it. The point is, don't lose sight of it. You're getting these cool little dopamine hits along the way. And that's a big piece of it. We need to gamify this. This isn't like boring old academia stuffed in a book somewhere. The people that gamified this a long time ago are so far down on the path. And the problem is, just as a society, we don't talk about this stuff. It's just an outlier. It doesn't have to be. This can be fun. And what if you can do this? And then how can you motivate as many people in your social circle to do this with you? It's even more fun.
This has been great. So can you let everyone know with Choosify where they can find you and everything online? And also give a shout out to the Facebook group in Canada.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hook you guys up with the Facebook group for people pursuing financial independence in Canada. To find that, just go to choosify.com/local. Find a group near you. Also, our podcast is Choosify. It can be found anywhere that podcasts are found. And if you want to get started with us, just go to choosify.com/start. We've tried to make it super easy to dig through all of our content on that page.
Great. Thanks for being on the show.
Tom, thanks so much for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan, for breaking down the steps to achieving a fully funded lifestyle. You can find the show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Jonathan Mendonza. Have you joined our community on Facebook yet? You can be part of the Facebook group by looking up MapleMoney Community on Facebook or going to MapleMoney.com/community. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.